So let's go back to that tacrolimus Prograf case that where the FDA approved the new indication for lung cancer for the compound. What motivated FDA to agree that the real world evidence was sufficient and that an RCT was not required in that particular situation?
Well, it checked all of the boxes. We haven't talked about what are the criteria for good quality research, but even though they haven't spelled them out particularly well, this one did check it. First of all, it was a known data source. It was a data source that we know it exists. We know its quality. There's little missing data in the transplant registry. They had experience in using it before, so they had some sense of experience and track record of using it. It was relevant because it included all of the patients. It wasn't a sample of patients in the US. It was all of the patients in the US. So there's no question about, was it representative of the population that it was deemed necessary to treat. Plus, they had ample RCT evidence in other indications, which might lead you to believe that it should be efficacious in other situations where they have similar biomarkers. And so there was every reason to believe it. Then it was unethical to do an RCT. We've been using tacrolimus for years in lung transplant, so no one was ever going to do an RCT. Everything lined up there so that the FDA could say, yes, we believe that there is substantial evidence that tacrolimus works in lung cancer. And by the way, this gives us a bar that you can look at that may not have to be crossed by everyone who wants to get an indication based upon real world evidence, but this kind of tells you what an ideal would look like.
So just a minor side note, I started my career as a product manager for Sandimmune cyclosporin in organ transplant. And we did at that time what I believe was one of the very early real world evidence studies, where the research question was, does a particular dosage of Sandimmune prevent organ rejection? We were seeing that in the real world that physicians were decreasing the dose over time from a cost standpoint. It was at the time the most expensive drug in the world for $8,000 a year. And while Medicare picked up a good portion of the cost, it didn't pick up all of them. And so patients were pushing back on their doctors, skipping doses. And so the doctors began to try to diminish the dose. And then we began seeing, because we had very good data about the duration of organ survival, that their rejection was occurring sooner. So we put together about 100 different transplant physicians around the United States and paid organ transplant coordinators to pull the data on the dosage and the likelihood of organ transplant, and published this article in New England Journal. And it was a really amazing example, as we began pushing that data out to the doctors, of how they began accepting that information far more than they would with an RCT, because this was data from their peers and they had the knowledge that it was providing insight beyond what they were getting in published clinical trials. So that was back in 1986. And that experience, this is completely aside, but that experience then caused me, because I was very interested in how we designated the value of life, because they were pushing back so much on the cost, $8,000 to save a life. We had no terminology in the United States at the time for that. So then I went back to school and to Wharton and Penn to study under McGann, to cobble together a PhD in health economics, which did not exist at the time. So it's really fascinating to me how the arena of transplant, both from the government choosing to pay because it was societally good and better than dialysis, they chose to reimburse it and pay for it, and how it also informed probably some of our early thinking on real world evidence.
Very interesting.